And I think that the future of the world literally depends on us transcending this binary good, bad, Democrat, Republican, black, white, whatever, Israeli, Palestinian, whatever it happens to be, and to recognize the common humanity in us all. And yeah, we don't all agree on everything. We don't have the same politics. But fundamentally, as I started from the very beginning of this conversation, it's only because that's how people are trying to fulfill the same fundamental needs that I'm trying to fulfill in my life.
Yeah.
A sense of feeling valuable and worthwhile, and that what I say matters, and what I do matters, and who I am matters. And that's actually my ultimate goal as a teacher, is to try to inspire others, kids, adults, to feel that way about themselves, that what they say matters and who they are matters. And to me, that's the best way of overcoming the traumas of rejection and the traumas of broken relationships, is to remember the essence of who you are.
Hey everybody, it's Kenya, and this is the Thank You for Saying No podcast, where we find meaning in life's unexpected turns, where we talk about how rejection can actually be a blessing, and where we learn to be grateful for life's no moments. Before we start, can I ask for a favor? If you like the show, the best way you can support Thank You for Saying No is to subscribe or follow wherever you are currently listening to the podcast. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever. Hit that subscribe button or hit that follow button. This is a free way you can support the podcast. And my commitment to you is that we'll find guests that you want, I'll listen to your feedback, and I will make sure the podcast gets better and better. And with that, let's get started. Rabbi Stephen Carr Reuben, welcome to the Thank You for Saying No podcast.
Thank you. And I didn't say no to the podcast.
You didn't.
I said yes.
Thank you.
Right off the bat. It was your first yes.
So you guys, to the listeners, this is a very exciting episode because I have Rabbi Reuben here, and you are like a rabbi I've never met before in my life. And when me and my mom met you, we knew we had to get you on the podcast because you're very special and you speak in a way that is very Thank You for Saying No themed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I need to give some examples of what I'm talking about. So you have this bracelet that you wear. You're wearing it right now, that has all different religion symbols, not just Jewish, but all of the religions. And I remember at the end of your service, when we pray for those in need, you prayed for suffering addicts and alcoholics. And then something else that stood out to me was just your inclusiveness, like how you lead with how can we all come together instead of how focusing on all of our differences, you really focus on how we can all come together. And I remember once in temple, you talked about like 12 or something, 8 or 12 proverbs from other religions. Like you really aim to bring people together, and that is very admirable.
Well, thank you. But, it's really as simple as recognizing that people are fundamentally the same. I mean, we have different genders. Now we have some in between genders. We have boys, girls, we have Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus. We have all these different religions. We have different races. We have different languages, but we're one little planet. To me, it's kind of like the first time I saw the picture of the Earth from space, which I think of often. And I was so struck immediately with the fact that there were no little dotted lines that showed this country ends here and this country starts there, and this people and this culture, that we're human beings and we all wrestle with the same needs and, the same dreams and hopes, and everybody wants to feel like who they are matters and what they say matters. And everybody wants love, to feel loved, to be loved. So my goal has always been really to be as inclusive as I can in everything that I do. So I'm always, on some level, a kind of representative of all Jews and all Jewish civilization. And I want to represent Jewish civilization at its best. And to me, its best is, in a sense, reflected in the very first thing, that the very first sentence in the very first book of the Torah, of the Bible, says about human beings, which is that human beings are created in the image of God, in the divine image. And I've always been struck with what it doesn't say except. It says human beings are made, in Hebrew, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. It doesn't say except women, except people who speak Arabic or Spanish, or people who are black or white, or there's no except. It's the power of that creation myth of the Jewish people from thousands of years ago is that it's the every person story. It's Adam and Chava, it's Adam and Eve, the sort of original human beings that have no language, that have no religion, that have no race. You don't know what they're just human beings made out of the earth itself, and then religion forms later on. So that's sort of always been a guiding principle of mine.
Yeah. And that stands out. You present that way too, and it's received.
Nice to hear.
Yeah. So today I want to talk about your thank you for saying no moments and the lessons you've learned. So A no moment is a time you were told no, said no, or a situation didn't work out in a life-changing way, and how you found a way to be thankful for it because of what it taught you or what it led you to.
Okay. Well, why don't I start with the beginning of my life?
Take us from born to being a rabbi.
So I was born at a very early age in Santa Monica, California, long ago, 1949, January 28th. And when I was born, my name was Stephen Michael Schneider. My name has evolved in many ways since then. The first no was that my biological father died of a heart attack when I was 4.
Wow.
So suddenly I had no father. I had a mother and an older sister, who I still have, an older sister. My mother just died last year at 100.
Wow.
So so I've always been praying that I have her genes and not my dad's genes. But in the meantime, my mother remarried like 2 years later to my father, my second father, whose name was Jack Reuben. So, and he adopted my sister and I formally. He came with his own daughter, who became my oldest sister. My mother adopted her, and my last name changed from Schneider to Reuben. So then I was Stephen Michael Reuben for the rest of my life until I got married to my current wife. But in the meantime, the having Jack Reuben as my father transformed my life. I went from this frightened little boy, where literally at 4 years old, I had people telling me, well, now you have to be the man of the family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was not a good thing to say to a 4-year-old who just had his father die. And I ended up with this fabulous father for my entire life, until just a couple of years ago when he died at the age of 99. Wow. And that experience ultimately became a fundamental part of my consciousness, how I saw the world, both the trauma and the savior of, the redemption that sort of came with my second father. And my parents fiercely had all of us. There was no such thing as stepfather or half sister. We were just a family forever. And so when I ultimately became a rabbi, I'll just jump to there, but I'll go back and forth. When I became a rabbi, one of the things that I brought and I have been able to bring to my encounter with people in their traumas and their struggles and their losses is my whole lifetime experience of dealing with grief and its after effects, and something that's been just death, a part of my life and my consciousness forever. And it's a big part of people's lives. Their fears of death, they're wrestling with death. Everybody deals with loss. I'm sure that's a big part of your podcast and of all the people who come here, is how they deal with different kinds of loss in life and turn those into the yeses of life and learn something positive and inspirational from those losses. So I started out at age 4 with that already. And I know that that's a big part of how I have the sensitivity that I grew up with to hearing other people's and recognizing losses in other people. So, that was the first thing.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And life's filled with, not fortunately all my parents dying, but filled with losses of many kind. You came to my synagogue and saw me functioning as a rabbi leading services, for example. Well, before I was at that synagogue in Pacific Palisades, I was at a synagogue in Tarzana for 6 years. I was there for 6 years trying to get out of that synagogue and find a synagogue of my own. I had to stay in Los Angeles because while I was there, I got married to Didi. and we have a custody issue because my daughter was my stepdaughter, so I couldn't leave LA. And I applied to a couple other synagogues to be their rabbi and got rejected.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, at the time, I thought, how could they reject me?
I'm like, how could
How
they?
could anybody turn me down? It was like, I was so full of myself. What do you mean? You know, I was in Tarzana, and there was an opening for a rabbi right up the road in Northridge,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew lots of people there, and I thought, oh, this is kind of an obvious thing. I'll go there. And they turned me down. And I got to say, I was devastated.
Yeah.
I mean, I really needed to get out of the situation I was in at Judea at the time. And I couldn't understand why what was wrong with me,
I know.
you know. And as a result, I ended up in the Palisades.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, Pacific Palisades is a pretty good place to be stuck in Los Angeles if you're going to end up somewhere.
I say.
And I ended up in this wonderful community that started out with a congregation of about 240 families. And by the time I stepped down as the senior rabbi 10 years ago already, we were 1,000 families.
Wow.
You know, and it's been an amazing experience. And only because I didn't get accepted in two places, because I tried to be the senior rabbi at Temple Judea while I was there too. They rejected me. Ahavat Shalom rejected me. and I ultimately ended up in a much better place. And I know that, you know, in my counseling and in my talking to people, literally this podcast is a perfect thing that you're doing, because every single person I know can look back at their life and say, oh, what I thought was a tragedy at the time was the only reason I met the woman of my dreams, or, you know, I lost this job and I was devastated, but then I ended up with something that was so much better, which is clearly what happened to me at every stage. And I know that everybody has those experiences if they're willing to see them that way.
Yeah, that reminds me of what you were talking about a few weeks ago, how what feels like a curse can actually be a blessing.
Right. Yeah, because, you know, I mean, I always say life is filled with blessings and curses. And one of the great challenges of being human is you can't always tell which is which. And for sure, we've all had these experiences, the things that we thought were started out as blessings. People have lots of relationships. They end up with divorce. They end up with all kinds of trauma that they didn't recognize in the beginning. And that ultimately, I mean, I was married before as well. It wasn't traumatic, just didn't work out. In fact, we're on very good terms. My first wife and I actually married her to her current husband. I did the wedding, which I think I'm the only rabbi I know who's done that. It was kind of a fun experience. They actually got married in exactly the same place that she and I got married.
Oh my God.
Which was in her parents' backyard.
A fun fact is I'm an ordained minister.
Nice.
So I can marry people.
Lovely.
No one's asked me to, but I could.
It's one of the great parts of being an ordained anything.
Yeah.
It's to be able to be there as people join their lives, and the excitement and the joy and the anticipation that, you know, life is what we make of it. You know, I always think that human beings have a superpower, and our superpower really is that we are meaning makers.
Our podcast tagline is finding meaning in life's unexpected turns.
I love that. So I'm holding this cup that you sweetly gave me. Thank you for saying no. I love this.
Thank you.
It's cool. So if we were decided right now it's Friday and we're going to do Shabbat here in the studio, and I put some whatever in here, grape juice or whatever, and I went, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen, this cup would become a Kiddush cup. Yeah. And suddenly, boom, it's a sacred object.
Because we give it that meaning.
Because we say so. You know, and in a sense, all of life is that way. It's part of that's why I say it's our superpower. And part of what I try to do as a rabbi is inspire people to know that they have that power, that things can be meaningful because they say so, because they infuse the meaning in relationships, in the actions that they take, in the rituals that they bring into their own lives. And that's why religious traditions survive for thousands of years, because people pick up a ritual and say, yes, I'm going to make this meaningful to me, whether it's saying a prayer every morning or a series of them, or the food you eat, or how you bless things, or all the rituals that we go into, or rituals about getting married. Yeah. You know, things that we do, certainly in Jewish life, there's always rituals about marriage and stomping on glasses and things. And every time I talk with a couple about their wedding, did it twice this week, and we talk about the rituals, and they'll say, well, okay, so what does stomping on a glass at the end of a Jewish ceremony mean? And I could open 6 books and go, okay, this person says it means that, but this person said it meant that. And in this time of period of Jewish history, it pretty much mostly meant that. And what I like it to say that it means is, and then I'll tell them what I like it to say. And that's the reality. Whoever happens to be officiating at their wedding, whatever they say, that's what stomping on the glass means.
Yeah.
That moment, for that ceremony, for that ritual, for their wedding. And that's an amazing thing that we have, an amazing power that we have to recognize our ability to transform even the darkest moments of our lives. I mean, I know you were talking to Holocaust survivors, the darkest moments, the most tragic experiences, and there's tragedy all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, all the time. It's not what happens to us, it's what we do with what happens to us.
The Holocaust survivor, her name is Carmela Waldman. She is so positive. Like, her whole thing is keep being positive, like never give up. She only sees the good, and she went through what she went through, and that's still how she chooses to view the world.
Yeah, I always think of I was on a panel with John Wooden, the famous coach at UCLA for UCLA basketball, and we were talking together, and at one point he said, things work out best for those who make the best of how things work out. That's like a classic John Wooden kind of thing. Things work out best for people who make the best of how things work out. And that's kind of all of our challenge in life is, okay, this happened or that happened, this relationship, this experience that's out of your control. What is always in your control is how you hold that experience, what you do with that experience.
Tying that to the story you just told us about not getting the senior rabbi positions that you wanted, how do you personally handle that rejection? And what do you tell others who are facing it?
So the first thing I do always is remember that I have the ability to expand my perspective. The more narrowly you focus, or I focus, anybody focuses on what just happened, the more upset you are, the more you stay in that distress. The wider you can make your perspective, the easier it is to say, oh, well, I'm 33 years old, and what are all the things I've gone through? I'm 50 years old. What are all the things I've gone through, the ups and downs? What I always remind myself of is that my number one sort of metaphor for life is an EKG. You plug your heart into an EKG, it's to measure your heart. And if you're alive, I mean, it's a podcast, but if you're alive, it goes up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. That's what your heartbeat is. That's literally the pulse of life. The pulse of life is not a flat line. Flat line is death. You don't want flat line. You get your heart plugged in, you want it to go doom, 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 up and down and up and down. And I truly believe that is literally the pulse of all aspects of our life, our relationships, our professional relationships, our personal relationships. So when something traumatic happens or something that I wanted I got to know. I wanted to get hired. I didn't get hired. I wanted to get a better grade in the class. I got a shitty grade in the class because I didn't do my homework, or, I just blanked when I was taking the test, who knows what. I take a breath and I remember da-dum, da-dum, up and down. So at this moment, I'm in one of those downs, and just like my heartbeat, there'll be an up.
Yep.
There'll be an up. There'll be an up. And there's an up after every down until, the end of your life. And then I don't know what happens after. So maybe there's ups after that too. Could be. I'm not there yet.
Hey, everybody. Real quick, we have some awesome merch and you are going to want to check it out. I've linked it in the show notes. And listen, I pretty much exclusively wear Thank You for Saying No merch because it's literally that fashionable and that comfortable. We have t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, canvas bags. The t-shirts say Thank You for Saying No across the chest. The hoodies say Rejection is Redirection, like this hoodie right here. And there's more to come, so it's very cute. Okay, go check it out.
The only reason I became a rabbi was because of the Vietnam War.
Really?
Yes.
Connect the dots.
It's very easy. I went to college, my undergraduate at UC Davis. So my junior year of college, I decided I wanted to go to Europe or year abroad. And I discovered that I could go to Israel and not have to speak the language, because I wanted to go to France initially, but my French sucked, so I wasn't good enough to go study in French. But I could go to Israel, and one of my sisters was there at the time. And I thought, okay, I'll go to Israel for a year. So I went to Israel, studied at the Hebrew University, and all the courses I took were like Judaic studies classes, which I really liked. I liked the study. It was fun, and I felt connected to it. Then I came back for my senior year, and the Vietnam War was on.
Wow.
And as I was approaching the end of my senior year, the draft was happening. And at the time, they had something called a lottery for the draft, and every male who turned 18, which I had, got a number picked according to their match to their birthday.
Wait, in the U.S. or in Israel?
In the U.S., but it didn't matter. I was there.
Okay.
I was still in the American citizens. So I got my number pulled. Actually, while I was in Israel, my number was pulled, and my birthday number was 77. 77 was guaranteed to be drafted into the Army to go to Vietnam. So as I was coming toward the end of my senior year, I got a draft notice. I got reclassified as 1A, which is draftable. I got sent down for a physical to Oakland. I passed the physical, and I was in a total panic because last thing I wanted to do was join the Army personally and go to Vietnam and fight and kill or be killed or any of that.
Yeah.
And so I had a lawyer. I was trying to figure out what to do to not have to go into the Army at the time and go to Vietnam. And I realized that if I got myself into rabbinic school, I would get what was called at the time a 4D divinity school deferment. And since rabbinic school is 5 years long, for the next 5 years, I would have a deferment and I wouldn't be drafted and I could study, which I like doing. I already knew that I liked the study part. I had no interest in becoming a rabbi, and certainly not a congregational rabbi at the time. It seemed like a crazy job to be 24/7 and working for everybody else. But I was very interested in education. So I got into rabbinic school. So I breathed a sigh of relief. And then I had to go right back to Israel for the first year. And then I was studying here in LA. So in fact, at the time, I was telling Alex, I went across the street to USC and got a master's in education at USC.
Wow.
Because I was interested in education. And I figured whenever I get ordained as a rabbi and I'm done with rabbinic school, I'll do something in education, which actually I initially did, something in education. So I never really thought of becoming a congregational rabbi until I ended up as a congregational rabbi. Mm-hmm. And I ended up as a congregational rabbi 5 years after I was ordained, because ultimately I was ordained as a rabbi in New York, and I was working in the education department of the Reform Movement, their national office. I was the National Associate Director of Education for the Union of American Hebrew Congregations at the time, doing teacher training and writing stuff and whatever. But I was in New York. Well, I'm a Southern California person, as you know, if you grow up in Los Angeles, weather is not a factor in your life.
Yeah.
If you live in New York, weather is a factor in your life.
Yeah.
It's kind of embarrassing to say, but I was like obsessed with how much I had to spend time thinking about the weather all the time.
I know.
What am I going to put on? What's it going to be like? How do I have to go? And I hated the winter. I hated the summer. It's like there were 2 months I liked. So after 5 years in New York, I said, I got to go back to California.
Yeah.
And while I was in rabbinic school in California, I'd been teaching at Temple Judea in Tarzana, and the rabbi there had took a liking to me, and every 2 years he would reach out to me and say, "You ready to come back to California yet and come work here and be my associate?" And literally the day that I decided, I think it's time to go back to California, he called.
Oh my God.
I tend to manifest these weird things. So he called and said, "You ready to come back to California?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, it's a 2-year commitment. You come here, you work in the synagogue, and then you can figure out what you want to do."
Wow. So
that's what I did. So I went to Temple Judea, and I kind of almost immediately discovered that I couldn't imagine not being a congregational rabbi once I started.
Yeah.
It felt like such an incredible privilege to be invited into such powerful moments in people's lives, from birth to death and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And I've been pretty much doing it ever since.
Wow. Just to tie that for the listeners, you literally don't know what's around the corner. Like, you have no idea. You had no idea that you would end up being a rabbi, and it changes your whole entire life. And you love it.
Yes.
You love it.
Yeah. And it's exactly, I know it's the essence of this podcast, because it's really the essence of everybody's life, that you have to take what happens to you, take a breath, and say, okay, what are the possibilities now of this? Mm-hmm. What have I learned from this? How can I grow from this?
Yeah.
I think life is about growing forever. intellectually, spiritually, physically, in a sense. You're always, if you're not growing, you're shrinking, in my opinion. And we owe it to ourselves to be constantly feeding and nourishing ourselves in every way we can. And part of that is by relationships that we have with people. Meeting you, having you show up at the synagogue, so I happen to be there. To me, that's the joy and the gift of being a congregational or community rabbi, is all these opportunities to meet such interesting people who do such amazingly different, creative, talented things, and to be enriched myself as a result.
I feel in the times that I've gone through my hardest moments, my moments of rejection, my moments of things just not working out, is the times where I've grown the most and I've connected most spiritually to what I call a higher power. And I feel the most able to help others because of what I went through.
We have this interesting phrase in English. We talk about growing pains. Growing pains. We don't talk about, I don't know, what's the opposite of growing pains?
Pleasure?
Growing pleasure? Nobody ever says growing pleasure. They say, growing pains, because we physically, it's what happens to us. And we talk about growing pains because that is how we learn. We learn from stresses. We learn from traumas. We learn from difficulties, from overcoming and transcending difficulties. That's when we just had the Olympics. You watch these Olympians and in order to get there, what they had to go through to get to the Olympics, the last person who ran in whatever race, the last person is amazing. The last person, what they went through for years of training and whatever it took for their bodies to learn to be able to do what they could do. We pay attention to the gold and the silver and the bronze, but literally the last person running in any of those races or swimming in any of those swimming races is incredible. Imagine what they went through. And it wasn't, a walk in the park. All of that, all of the things that we grow because we're willing to take the knocks of it, to take whatever the challenges are of it. And if the more you see life as an opportunity filled with challenges, the easier it is for you to learn from the traumas and learn from the difficult moments of life. That's why I said, sort of expand your perspective and go, okay, I've had other challenges before. I got another challenge now. I lived through that one. I grew through that one. I can live through this one and grow through this one.
What role does forgiveness play when dealing with rejection from someone close to you? And how can one find peace when reconciliation isn't possible?
That's a big question.
It's a big one.
I think one of the ongoing challenges that we all have is continually learning to live with people with whom we don't agree on every level, and not turning them into enemies just because we had a falling out of one kind or another. We live in this hyper polarized society right now. I mean, we're in the middle of a presidential campaign, and that sort of highlights it all. But long before that, and I think the internet is in many ways one of the evils of this challenge in our lives. But there's always been, people have always disagreed and had falling outs, and I think the challenge is to find those people who to whom you can turn when life is at its most difficult, that can remind you of the value that you have when someone else is tearing you down, or someone else is putting you down, or you're feeling rejected. My wife does that for me. She's my biggest fan, and always reminds me if something's difficult or something didn't work out the way it's supposed to, of how she sees me. And I always think that when I counsel couples who are going to get married or thinking about getting married or having relationships, I like to remind them that one of the great opportunities is to do your best to become the person that you see reflected in your partner's eyes. No. Because they always think better of you than you think of yourself. Because you have all these inner thoughts. They don't hear your inner thoughts. And you have all these things that make you feel bad or make you feel like that's not my best. And they see you through their own glasses, through their own lenses. And, that's the best way to sort of hold up a mirror for yourself, is to say, well, how does someone who really admires me, what are the qualities in me that they recognize that sometimes I forget I even have, and to rely upon that. And I think that the future of the world literally depends on us transcending this binary good, bad, Democrat, Republican, black, white, whatever, Israeli, Palestinian, whatever it happens to be, and to recognize the common humanity in us all. And yeah, we don't all agree on everything. We don't have the same politics. We don't. But fundamentally, as I started from the very beginning of this conversation, it's only because that's how people are trying to fulfill the same fundamental needs that I'm trying to fulfill in my life.
Yeah.
Sense of feeling valuable and worthwhile, and that what I say matters, and what I do matters, and who I am matters. And that's actually my ultimate goal as a teacher, is to try to inspire others, kids, adults, to feel that way about themselves, that what they say matters and who they are matters. And to me, that's the best way of overcoming the traumas of rejection and the traumas of broken relationships, is to remember the essence of who you are.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us an example in your own experience?
Sure. Sure. Well, as I said, I was married once before, and that relationship didn't work out. And that relationship, was interesting because I kind of knew I shouldn't get married when I got married.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 27 when I got married, and I ended up doing what I've seen so many couples do ever since. And part of the good part about that relationship that didn't work out is it helped me to see it in other people, which is so many people get married because of momentum. I mean, I was in this relationship. I was with this perfectly lovely human being. Wasn't a good match, but I was with her. And actually, we met when I was in Israel for my year. And she happened to come back to Los Angeles at the same time I did. We had this relationship. She moved in with me. When I went to New York for my last year, she moved there too. We'd been together for several years, and then I became a rabbi, and thought, I just can't live with someone as a rabbi. I need to be married. And there we were, and it was sort of the momentum of the relationship itself.
Yeah.
Even though it really wasn't sure this is probably not the right person, but some part of my own ego felt like, well, I had to take it to its ultimate end. And so we got married. And she was not happy with me as a rabbi. She wanted me to be a doctor. I got a PhD, so I ended up being a doctor.
You're technically a doctor.
It's a different kind of doctor. That was long after we weren't married to each other anymore. But, it was like, it didn't work. And I would have probably stuck with it because I was a rabbi. I had all these expectations of myself. A rabbi shouldn't this, and a rabbi shouldn't that, and I shouldn't this. And ultimately, she knew it wasn't working, and she left. So it happened that maybe a week after she left, she decided she wanted to come back, and that was a mistake. And by then, I was able to say, no, you were right. This is not going to work.
Yeah.
And we're not a right match at all. Out of that, I learned a lot about myself and about, okay, how many times have I let my own ego, my own sense of what I should be doing, how I should act because of my role or because of whatever, get in the way of doing the right thing for me, and I think we all do that. So that was a powerful lesson. And as a result, an amazing relationship for the last 40 years that we've been married with Dee Dee.
Truly amazing, though, if I could just highlight for the listeners, because I've seen you two together.
Yeah.
And me and my mom talk about this, and me and my friend who I was with that one day, we adore your interactions. We adore them.
It's like, when I met her, it was like magic for me. I actually met her. She was singing in a club on Ventura Boulevard. But literally, I heard her sing, and it just went right to my heart.
Yeah. And
took a while. We dated for 2 years before we got married. But for sure, it was kind of like also a physical, literally, when I would touch her, hold her hand or whatever, I felt grounded in a way that I've never felt before, just physically grounded.
Yeah.
And I've been that way ever since. She's like an amazing partner with me in everything that we do. And I wouldn't have ever had that if I'd let my own ego and perception of how I should be, because I have the title rabbi or whatever, would have kept me in the previous relationship unhappily, as I see so many people who stay for all kinds of reasons of their own self-image or whatever in relationships. And you have to have the courage that it takes sometimes to say, okay, that was a mistake on my part, and learn and grow from it. And you never know what's around the corner. And she was around the corner because I was at Temple Judea, because I hated the weather in New York, because I didn't want to go to Vietnam, because on and on.
Yeah.
It's like the threads that you can follow all the way back.
Especially when the no's come from us, like you deciding, you know what, I need to look past my ego and my perceptions. The no's that come from us can be so much harder sometimes, because sometimes when you get a no, it's passive. You're like, okay, well, this is what I'm dealt. I have to deal with it.
Right.
But when you say no, you have to be active. You have to make decisions. You have to move differently. And
ultimately, growing from that allowed me to have the remarkable relationship that I've had for all these 4 decades.
The spiritual growth of being who you are is, to me, is a spiritual experience of showing up exactly how I am, no matter what.
Yeah. Again, it's kind of the challenge of finding the authentic you. We have so many experiences in our lives when we have roles. I'm Stephen Carr Reuben. So
wait, where did Carr come from?
So I changed my name several times. Why? Because Dee Dee, her last name was Carr. She was Dee Dee Carr. Now, she was married to someone else before. She had a baby, Gable, my stepdaughter. Gable, she gave Gable Carr as her middle name. So Gable's middle name was Carr. She had a different last name, her biological father's last name, when she was born, which she didn't really like. So Gable didn't like. So when Gable was like 17, she legally dropped her last name and became legally just Gable Carr. So when I married Dee Dee, I said, why don't I drop Michael as my middle name, use Carr as my middle name, take your middle name, you're taking my last name after all, Reuben, and then Gable and you and I will all share a name, because I'm not her biological father. So that was part of the motivation of doing that. And I'd already been through, I was Schneider, I was Reuben, what's a name?
What's another?
Whatever it is. It's also because I see people that wrestle with, what does this mean? And who's my identity is not about my name. What you call me, people call me all kinds of things. Now they call me Rabbi. Suddenly I lost all my names and it just become Rabbi. So, but it's true. So you're known by different things, by different people, depending upon who they are. You're known as my daughter, you're known as my mother, you're known as my sister, you're known as my friend, you're known as my whatever teacher, whatever it happens to be. And those are all those different labels reflect different relationships that you have with people. And my challenge is to sort of integrate all of those me's into who I am. I'm the teacher to some people. I'm the rabbi, I'm a spiritual guide and leader to some people. I'm the husband to my wife. I'm the father to my daughter. I'm the brother to my 3 sisters. We Zoom every Monday on my 3 sisters and I, because they're all over the world. And all of the different relationships are both just a part of who I am and also part of the authentic core of who I am as well. And, being able to hold all of those in your own embrace, I think is one of the ways that helps you to deal with the no's of life, and because my sisters are supporters of mine. Often I look at what they've gone through and I learn from that, and I'm able to talk to them about lots of things that if it's a challenge, I have prostate cancer. So going through that was a no that I got 4 years ago, right in the middle of the high holidays.
Wow.
One year. And so I started freaking out because, like everybody else, anything that says cancer, you start freaking out.
Yeah.
And I went to this first a urologist, and he said, well, there's only two things to do: have surgery or have radiation. And I didn't want to do any of those, and either of those. And I was freaking out. And then I found an oncologist who looked at all my stuff and said, "This is not going to kill you." So I relaxed, and I said, "Okay, what should I do?" And he gave me all this research, and part of it was I became a vegan. And changed my life. Became a vegan because I read this thing called the China Study, which was one of those studies that shows the power of food as medicine and what nurtures cancer and what doesn't, and particularly this kind of cancer. And so it was an opportunity. I started reading and learning all this stuff about prostate and cancer and everything else. And that changed my life. So it happened to coincide with COVID. And so it was a good timing for me because we were homebound, and Dee Dee and I figured out what I'm going to eat and what she's going to eat, because she's not a vegan, that we can do together. And I'm fine.
Yeah.
And, everything's under control because I did it myself. And I chose the way that I was going to react to this. This was a no that turned into many positives for me, both how I'm able to counsel other people and be there for people who are going through some of the same fears and some of the same anxiety, particularly lots of men, because when you get my age, I'm 75, lots of men have prostate issues and things that just kind of comes with the territory. And because I'm very open about things that go on with me, they know that I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, they come to me. So it's another trauma experience that then provides an opening for people to feel safe to come to me to talk about it. When I got divorced, the same thing, by the way. When I was publicly public as a rabbi about the fact that I got divorced, when I initially thought, I'm a rabbi, I shouldn't get divorced. I got divorced. I let everybody know. And suddenly all these people that were wrestling with their relationships and going through divorces found me a safer person to come to talk to, so I could be much greater help to people because they trusted me, because they know I'd been through this or I'd been through that. The same with, when, as I said, when my father died when I was a child, it opened up people and made them feel safer to come and share difficult moments in their lives, and therefore allowed me to serve people more, which is what I want to do.
Yeah. The friends and family I have who are listening to this, or whenever it comes out, when they hear what I'm about to say, they're going to laugh. But all of my trauma and hard times I've been through have made me a more patient person. And they're going to laugh because I'm not a patient person, just already.
Well, you just said more. You didn't say
exactly.
More patient. You just said you were a more patient person.
Exactly.
Should have seen me before.
No, that's exactly it. But I'm more patient and I'm more understanding. And so if they come to me frustrated about something or someone, instead of, bashing on that person or being like, why are they doing this? Why aren't they doing it like we would do or whatever? I can be more understanding because of everything I've gone through, and especially those hard moments. It's just made me a more understanding person. And I try and operate from a place of the bigger picture, like you were talking about earlier, seeing this one moment might be so frustrating, but in the grand scheme of things, how can we move through this moment to get to a better place at the end? Instead of winning this moment, win the bigger picture.
How did you end up starting this podcast?
Through rejections. So when I graduated law school, or when I was graduating, I hadn't graduated yet, I was applying to so many jobs in Washington, D.C. That's where I wanted to work. I felt like I could make a difference there. I wanted to be an environmental attorney. I kid you not, I applied to hundreds of places. I would cold email places, just, hey, can we talk? Hundreds. And I didn't hear back from any of them. And I remember thinking after every rejection, I will be glad this isn't working out one day. I will be saying thank you for saying no. So when I found a job in California, I was like, you know what? I think this needs to be a podcast. I think it does, because when I was telling people about my sort of mantra, they were relating. Once I was at Starbucks with my dad talking about the podcast before it became the podcast, and we were talking about the concept of thank you for saying no, and this guy overheard us and he was like, oh, I relate to that. And I felt like that was my sign. Okay.
I'd like to be on your podcast. Could you start it already, please?
Right? And so that's where it came from. It came from this moment of myself going through rejection and, in a way, looking for my own inspiration through guests and stuff. But then I think what pushed me to start it is someone close to me overdosed on fentanyl and passed away. And I wanted to create a gallery, I don't know what the word is, a gallery of content that people could go to when they're going through their hardest moments and hear stories like the one you're telling today, that it'll work out and it'll be better than you could have imagined. Like, you don't have to give up right now. Like, wait, just wait. It'll get better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fabulous that you're doing this. And I think literally every human being that I've ever met can use this kind of conversation, because as you said, we all have traumas, we all have losses, we all have rejections in life. So many stories you can read about all these famous people who got rejected, 50 times, 100 times, all these best-selling authors who sent their proposals everywhere and everybody rejected them. And, finally one person said, I'll take a chance.
Yeah.
And I mean, I had that. I've had like 7 books published.
What?
Nobody buys any of them, but it didn't matter. I didn't really care about getting people buying them. I just like writing them. So, but there were also different publishers and different things and lots of rejections. And, I took it in stride, because particularly nowadays you can always self-publish. So the last book that I did, my wife and I wrote, we self-published during COVID. It was our COVID book. It's called How to Marry Your Second Husband First. But, I wrote books that were really counseling books about interfaith marriage. I've been very involved in interfaith issues and about parenting issues, and because I thought it would be helpful to people. And there's something amazingly exhilarating and satisfying about one person walking up and going, I read your book and it changed my life.
Yeah.
It's like, what's better than that?
Yeah.
And I think about people who are bestsellers who sell millions of books and think how incredible that must be.
Yeah. That's how I feel about positive reviews on the podcast. Like, anytime I feel like, I don't know if I should do it as consistently, or maybe I should do further episodes, or just stop altogether, I get a comment or a DM from someone like, thank you for keep doing this. Thank you for these episodes. So it makes it all worth it.
And that's kind of what I've felt like just as a rabbi all these years. I've been a rabbi since 1976. That means I've been a rabbi for 48 years. 2 years I will have been a rabbi for half a century. In doing different things but you speak, you write, you send things out into the universe, and you never really know who's reading it or who's being touched by it. Or I'm leading a service and some people are online and some people are sitting 10 feet away from me. You don't know how you're being heard or what impact you're having. All you can do is keep doing the best you can. And in my case, I'm very, 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 very lucky, because I have lots of people who come over to me and say, oh, I really love this that you did, or thank you for that. I get a lot of positive feedback that I'm sure most people don't have that luxury. And I feel very privileged that people over the years are telling me things that I said or wrote that turned out to be something meaningful to them. And I take that as an incredible gift, because I just imagine all the teachers in the classroom that never hear from any of their students and they have no idea,
Yeah.
But everybody there's people that somebody for sure has carried something they said their whole life and maybe never told them, and it's an amazing privilege when somebody circles back and says, by the way, and in my case, I have it all the time. So I'm really lucky. And I have people that come to me to get married, for example, who I officiated their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah a decade before, or, and then they show up and go, oh, I always loved so-and-so about something you said. And I always remembered this, and I go, really? Because it's like a surprise always, but a lovely surprise and a lovely gift. And I'm very conscious that most people don't have that privilege.
Yeah. Well, it comes hand in hand with the kind of work you do and the genuine way in which you present. It's almost hard not to get something valuable from you.
It's very sweet of you.
So let's end on this question. What advice would you give to someone who's struggling to find meaning after a rejection?
They should call me.
They really should listen to this episode.
They should listen to this episode. Call me at Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades. Happy to talk to you. Number one, they need to trust themselves. I would say, think about a time when you were successful. anytime, in any grade, doing anything, the littlest thing. Think about a time when you were in second grade and, you were great at playing dodgeball. Doesn't really matter. Anything. And remember that life isn't linear. It's not one thing. It's all of it. It's the blessings and the curses, as we were mentioning before. It's the good and the bad. It's the up and the down. It's that heartbeat. Listen to your heartbeat. Put your hand on your heart. And I tell people to do this all the time. Literally put your hand over your heart and realize that if you're hooked up, it's pum, 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 up and down, up and down. You may be in one of those down moments. The next moment it's going to be up. And maybe that moment will be a slow heartbeat. And it may take a day or a week or a month or a year before you look back and say, oh, because of that, I ended up over here. I ended up meeting that person. Or I ended up going in a different direction. You never know what's around the corner. You never know. And to have faith that this is the nature of life itself. Everybody deals with loss. Everybody deals with rejection. It's not just you. Everybody deals with the no's of life. And to think about any yeses that you've had and remember, okay, I had that yes. I can have more yeses coming up.
Yeah. And you're not alone going through it. You're not alone. So where can people find your books? Like, what if we want to read your books? Where can we find
Go to Amazon and look up Rabbi Stephen Carr Reuben, and you'll have all these books floating around.
Well,
or come by my office and I'll give you one because I buy them and give them away. So
I want a book, but I want to buy it. But I want you to sign it.
Okay.
I want you to
Happy
sign my
to do
book.
that. I should have brought something and signed it and just given it to you.
So seriously, thank you for making the time to come on the podcast today.
My pleasure.
I'm so thankful that I get to share you and your wisdom with my listeners. And I'm just so grateful. It worked out like so serendipitous, I guess. I didn't expect to show up at your temple at KI, and we were there, and the sort of theme, the Torah portion of the service was curses that turn into blessings.
Yeah.
And
perfect.
It was perfect. So thank you.
That's the way life works out. Perfectly. Perfectly the way it does.
If you hadn't not gone to Vietnam and you had not become a rabbi and I had not met you, I wouldn't have had you on the podcast.
Exactly. See? All goes back to my lottery number of 77. It was my lucky number 77 after all. Yeah. I thought it was a curse. Turned into a blessing.
Turned into a blessing. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
On the podcast, we want to connect with the audience and create a community that inspires and grows together. We have a way to do that. Submit your own thank you for saying no moment or story and how it's impacted your life in a great way, and then we'll read it on the podcast. There's a form linked in the description where you can submit. You can respond anonymously, of course, but if you leave your name and your social media, we'll give you a little shout out when we read your submission. And all submissions will be part of a drawing to win some exclusive Thank You for Saying No merch. Follow and subscribe to the Thank You for Saying No podcast, and you'll get every episode as soon as it's released.